Hospital reporters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Panwo TV and welcome to this video, which is got a rather intriguing title. I thought I chose quite a good title for it. Catastrophic D on Reddit. You may wonder what the hell is he talking about. It all will become clear, but this is all to do with a subject I have discussed before in summary. And I have also addressed in detail on Panwo Radio. Those of you who listen to Panwo Radio will know I have actually done a program about that. And the clue is behind me because I've got like this grey alien you can see behind me. It's a face of a grey alien. Now, according to YouTube, this is a leaked image. Now, as you know, leaked images like that are everywhere. They're to a penny. And I mean, they're so easy to create now. For example, the title shot, the title pictures in this particular video I created with Grok. Which is Grok is not bad actually. I mean, I asked him yesterday to do a picture of Queen Boudica, and it was awful. But I asked him to do a picture of an alien in a laboratory having an autopsy, and they did quite a good job, I thought. And the end image is like a kind of what I think possibly the person I'm going to talk about it looks like. So that's what it is. So this is like a deep dive into what I have discussed before, and I'm talking, of course, about the missing Reddit scientists. Now, I did a brief summary of it. What happened was, now it all goes back to Reddit, and you may think that's a bit weird because Reddit is well, it's a bit like 4chan. It's kind of a typical 2020 social media dumping ground for all kinds of information, and it favors quantity over quality. Let's face it, it does, doesn't it? And it has this upvoting and downvoting system for trying to sort these things out. But what is upvoted is not always what I would consider the finest mental nutrition. So you have to be quite discerning. You have to use your common sense. But occasionally, posts appear, like as with 4chan and 8chan or 8kun or whatever it's called now. Posts do appear that stand out. They have like this ring of authenticity. It's good to trust your intuition, I think, because your brain thinks in, your rational mind thinks in series, but your subconscious thinks in parallel. So your subconscious can analyze like 90% of everything that comes in, whereas your conscious mind can analyze 5% in great detail. So it's good to trust your intuition with these things. Obviously, it has to be backed up by rationality, but it's still good. I mean, even Stephen Hawking once said he could feel what was a good theory in his little finger. He said his little finger, because as you know, he had this ALS, which meant he couldn't move. But his little finger used to twitch when a theory was particularly good. So some things have a ring of authenticity, and there's also circumstantial evidence that backs them up, that leads to them worth being picked out and highlighted. And this, of course, this missing Reddit scientist situation is something that appeared on 2 subreddits about a year ago. They were Our Aliens and Our Biology. Now, if you go to those, they were started on Our Aliens, but they were copied to Our Biology. I'm going to focus on the Our Biology one because this is the one in which it has the question. It has a Q&A as well. I'll just show you it briefly. I won't show you everything, but this is it, Our Biology. Now, there's an awful lot. This is a long read. It's going to take a while to deep dive it, but I will go through it. Like I said, I'm not going to. It's all text. So there's no need to show you. Now, I'm not going to do a silly voice when I read. What I'll do instead is I'll just do this. I'll put my glasses on when I'm reading from the text. I'll take them off when I'm talking to you. That's probably the best way you can discern who I'm referring to. Got some hot coffee ready. A few feminist tears, that'll keep me sustained. So this refers to an individual who just kind of like, this is really, really weird. This individual just popped up on social media. This person just popped up on Reddit saying, and the opening paragraph of the post on the subreddit Our Aliens was really quite remarkable. An amazing claim. From the late 2000s to the mid-2010s, I worked as a molecular biologist for a national security contractor in a program to study exobiospheric organisms. Now that's aliens, I think it means. ETs. I will share with you lots of information on this subject. Feel free to ask questions or ask for clarification. And it says here, it seems like all my comments have been deleted. I'll post an answer at the end of the message. And there are actually comments on here. Now, I've made some notes on this particular text, which I'll talk about. I should say from the start, I don't understand. I don't understand everything that I'm reading here, and I will tell you when I don't understand. Okay. All I know is this person goes to great lengths to cover their trail, to hide their identity. They deliberately avoid giving details that might give away who they are, and indeed they insert red herrings, that is fake information, to try and cover up themselves even more. Although some information was leaked, or they accidentally let slip some information which maybe explain why they disappeared. But anyway, yeah, from the late 2000s and mid 2010s, that's a long time. That's a decade or so. I worked for a national security contractor. Which one? Come up. The aim of the program was, here we go. The aim of the program was to elucidate the genome and proteome basis of these organisms. Again, I don't understand what all this means, but I know that this has been shown to people who are trained in biology, and they say this person is genuine. This person is a real biologist. They use their terminology, their language, the way they put themselves across indicates that they are who they say they are, at least in terms of their education and training and experience. The genome and proteome basis of these organisms. Although the study of OBCs what's OBC? Sorry, it's EBO is exobiospheric organisms. So it makes it, they call them that. There's no doubt that they're talking about ETs, exobiospheric, meaning outside the biosphere. OBC could mean, I don't know what that means. It'll probably come back later, but has been going on for decades in other programs. The new high throughput DNA sequencing technologies of the late 90s unblocked stagnant research in this area. Since then, several breakthroughs have led to significant advances in our understanding of the genome and proteome of these beings. They're told from the outfront that this person knows is only working on one small segment of this project. I'll explain later. I believe everything's compartmentalized, but they're told that these are not beings from the Earth biosphere. What we have learned so far has enabled us to outline some disconcerting perspectives about our place in the universe. In other words, we're not alone. Briefly, we've discovered that the EBO genome is a chimera of genomes from our biosphere and from an unknown one. Right? I know what a chimera means because you may have heard me talk about the TV series Chimera. A DNA chimera is basically a hybrid, a creature that is made, that is developed from different DNA from different species. So basically, they're saying that this is some of the genetic material comes from our world. In other words, they have similarities to the life here, but they're also from an unknown source. This bit's interesting. They are artificial, ephemeral, and disposable organisms created for a purpose that still eludes us. Still partially eludes us. I'll be substantiating my statement after a brief introduction. Now, this is interesting because artificial. Now, there's many sources. Actually, do you mind if I don't keep taking my specs off? It's just annoying. I have to keep doing like that and shoving them into my earphones. Do you mind if I don't do that? What I'll do is I'll look at you at the camera when I'm addressing you. I'll try and make it clear whether I'm reading or not. You will see me looking down like that when I'm reading. Okay, so I'll deliberately scroll to keep the text I'm reading at the bottom of the monitor screen, so when I look up at you at the camera, you'll know what I'm talking about here. Okay, thanks. So artificial, a lot of sources. Like I said, this is when it comes to circumstantial evidence. There's lots of sources that talk about these beings being somehow biological robots or artificial creations of other beings, even possibly human. They're obviously maybe human-made in terms of the programmable, the PGLFs, the programmable generated life forms from Peasmore or from Dulce that Miles talks about on the BASIS project. Some people claim that is basically the entire phenomenon. That's what they are. They're created in secret government laboratories. I dispute that for several reasons. And one of the principal ones is simply their antiquity. Grey aliens, the aliens, this person, I say he, it may be a she, I don't know, or they. The person that he, she, or they is going to describe is essentially a grey alien. And they can be found throughout history, in legend, in myth, in cave paintings thousands of years old. So there's no way we had secret laboratories in the Stone Age. So. By the way, I am going to use the male pronoun for this person. I'm sure the feminists in the community will say it's to do with my tacit misogyny. Call it that if you wish. I'm not a feminist. And in fact, there's a part of me that wants to be transgressive when feminists try to impose these little standards on us, these fake standards. I understand this person could be female, in which case, if I've made a mistake and they're watching, then I apologize. But I feel uncomfortable to keep saying they or he, she, they, or this person. I want to call you by someone as if I'm speaking to you. So I'm going to use the male pronoun because because there's the other choices really make me feel uncomfortable. They sort of make this person seem, they make you, I'm addressing you, the person, if you're watching, they make you seem somehow detached from me, and I don't want that. So I'm going to call you he. Okay, I'm reading now. I'll be substantiating my statements after a brief introduction. The reason for disclosing these secrets is quite simple. I believe that every human being has the right to know the truth, and that to progress, humanity needs to divest itself of certain institutions and organizations that will probably not survive these revelations in the long term. I'm aware that I'll have very little impact in this regard, but I still believe that small leaks are necessary to break the dam of misinformation on the subject. When governments will eventually reveal these secrets, there will undoubtedly be societal upheaval, but in my opinion, the longer we wait, the worse it will be. This is absolutely a textbook example of a whistleblower. People say, well, David Grash is not a whistleblower. Okay, cool. Use whatever term you like, but no word apart from this person apart from whistleblower, can be applied to this person. This is, I think, the fundamentals of this person is basically someone inside the program. By the very definition of a whistleblower, someone inside the program doesn't like the idea that it's secret and wants to tell people and wants to do it in a way that will protect them, because they're obviously they will suffer serious consequences as a result, and maybe they have. This is basically what people like Larry Warren, who he did essentially the same thing, and other insiders who's, whether they're real or not. There's some people I know you don't all believe. I believe Larry personally. Not everyone does. Not everyone believes David Grush. Not everyone believes Jake Barber and Jason Sands and these other people. But this is their standard. This is a standard motivation, a standard manifesto this person has created. I can reading now. I choose to divulge what I know anonymously out of selfishness for the well-being of myself and my family. Well, I wouldn't call that selfishness. I call that completely reasonable. I'm aware that this diminishes the reach and credibility of my message, but it's the furthest I'm willing to go. Well, if you went further, mate, what would happen to you? What has happened to you if you've been detected? I'll come on to that at the end. I chose this forum because it offers a good compromise between anonymity and popularity. I'm not sure I'd say that about Reddit, but maybe you're right. In order to protect my anonymity, I will be purposely vague or even contradictory about any information that could identify me, date, education, role, etc. I'll even introduce red herrings in this respect. I want to make it clear that any information related to the subject of research will not be treated in this way. Okay, that's fair enough. The person wants to cover their tracks, but also they want to be honest about what they're talking about. They're not going to lie about the subject matter. Before going any further, please excuse me if you find it difficult to understand what I'm explaining. Some parts of my text are very technical. It's difficult to find the right balance between vulgarization and scientific explanation. I'll continue by talking about myself. Okay. I don't understand everything that's said here, but I know there's enough people who are trained in this subject, in this science, which I'm not. I've heard enough people say this is genuine. This person knows what they're talking about. This person is a real biologist. I'll continue by talking about myself. What's the point of talking about me? What's the knowing that the information will necessarily be misleading. I simply want to introduce a perspective on the type of people who work there, normal scientists. I have a PhD in molecular biology. I didn't actively seek to be part of this program. Rather, it was a stroke of luck that introduced me to one of the senior scientists. I met this person at a conference when I was presenting a poster on my PhD research. When I think back, I don't believe he was impressed by what I was presenting because it was, quite frankly, a project that wasn't going anywhere. I think it was rather the most important aspect of a professional life, the attitude and the ease with which you make connections. In other words, it's who you know, guys, you know. It's shortly afterwards I graduated and received a call from this person offering me a position. At the time, everything pointed to me working in a regular laboratory. Okay, so this is very interesting. This is interesting. What's interesting is this is the kind of recruitment process we're talking about here is the opposite of what you normally get in employment. Normally, the applicant will approach the employer and fill out a form and say, "I want this job." And they'll look at you and think, "Are you worth employing?" But this is very, very different. Firstly, the recruitment process is in the sense that the employer will approach the applicant rather than the other way around. They will actually approach the person they think is good enough or the right kind of person to be employed in this particular project. So when this person, when he was a PhD student, actually was at this conference, the person involved in the project was impressed by them in a certain way. They obviously thought this person had a certain quality, which would mean they'd be good person to invest into this secret project. What those are, I don't know, but I mean, it's kind of what's known as talent scouting, and this is exactly the way spies are recruited in an enemy nation. You may have seen my Spies of London video. People like George Blake, Kim Philby, etc. They were all recruited in this very same way. They didn't go up to the Russian embassy and say, "Hey, can I have a job, please?" I mean, some people do that. I mean, the Walker family did that, but usually spies are recruited. They're approached by agents who then will schmooze them into the project. And I'll say a bit more about that because this is very interesting. Here we go. I'm reading now. I did a series of 3 increasingly suspicious interviews, each in a different location, where my scientific background and knowledge became less and less relevant. There you go, see? They just thought he was the right kind of person. Maybe someone who's just willing to keep a secret, maybe someone with secrets he doesn't want to tell his wife, things like that. The first was with 2 of the senior scientists, the second and the third with people I've never seen again, and who were obviously not interested in science. We're the men in black. Yeah, it was probably seriously. It probably was CIA agents. Sometime after the interview, I was asked to go to a 4th location where what seemed like a corporate lawyer presented me with an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. He made sure not only to explain every detail, but also that I understood the consequences of not respecting it. Yeah, see. Now, this is interesting. Okay. And then after he'd been through this recruitment process, I'll carry on reading. The first employment weeks were by far the most memorable, although I spent most of that time in a depressing archive room. It consists almost exclusively of reading about the subject of study and to get us up to speed. There is no secret Wikipedia or even a reference book to guide us. There are only dry reports, memos, presentations, procedures, and SOP. That's standard operating procedures. These documents are almost exclusively about the biology of EBOs, but there are also a few that deal with other subjects such as the food, religion, or culture. There were no documents on their technology, right? I expect there are documents on their technology, but the people dealing with that are in another part, probably in another laboratory. Maybe many. You see, I believe this is all compartmentalized. So there are probably documents on the technology of the EBOs, but other scientists are dealing with them, not biologists, engineers. And that it's probably not happening in the same location. It's certainly not the same laboratory, maybe not even the same facility, maybe thousands of miles away. It may be in another part of the world. It may be in another country. As mentioned above, the aim of the project is to gain a better understanding of the EBO genome and proteome. To achieve this, a team of around 20 scientists, 4 senior scientists and a director was involved. The scientists, like myself, had as their main responsibility to carry out the technical work. As each scientist had, to my knowledge, a PhD, we were all somewhat overqualified for what is ultimately a technician's job. The senior scientists who make full use of their diplomas had the task of designing the essays and had a supervisory responsibility. They were also in charge of training new employees and sometimes even came in to do technical work. The director, of course, was the person in charge who dictated priorities to the senior scientists. He was rarely on site, and the few times he was, it was to attend meetings. Other than the scientific staff, there were security guards working for one subcontractor or another. There were no support staff such as janitors or maintenance workers. Scientists were responsible for this kind of work. In addition, logistically, constraints ensure that every scientist is capable of carrying out any technical activity. So we have a team of 25 people, the director, the 4 senior scientists, and all the rest. Again, they don't want too many people involved. They don't want people coming in to sweep the floors and make the tea. They do all that because you'd have to brief more people in. So fewer the better. Right, now we're going to come on to what I think is the first red herring. In fact, this was almost proved later on. The laboratory itself is located in Fort Detrick, Maryland, in a building used for legitimate biomedical research. Yeah, right. This is interesting. We've already heard that the scientist has been given very little extra information beyond what is functionally necessary to carry out their duties. There are probably other experts working in other aspects of the program who, like the people studying the technology, who know nothing of this scientist's duties. Again, there's a director. He probably knows the full picture. There's senior management. Probably even the senior scientists don't know everything. I think the Fort Detrick, Maryland, USA thing is a red herring, and they admitted they're going to introduce red herrings. Now, this is fair enough. They want to bury their true identity deeper, but it's an obvious possibility because Fort Detrick was, well, it probably still is, the center of the United States biological defense programs. So there are only 25 people involved in this, and therefore their individual cover could be blown quickly if they really were at Fort Detrick. And I wouldn't be surprised if even the biological program is spread out in numerous locations. There may even be some at Fort Detrick that this person's not involved in. So they say here, the clandestine operations are carried out in a restricted part of the basement. Oh, underground military base, yeah. Out of sight from regular workers. Basements are always used for things like this because it's more difficult to spy on them. You know, you can't peep in through windows and things like that. You can't eavesdrop very easily because it's underground. So you can't go and sit outside and listen at the window, stuff like that. There are even devices for actually, you can shoot laser beams at windows which pick up vibrations from inside, and you can actually hear people. It's a kind of microphone. You can hear people speaking inside. This is why basements are very often used, because it makes eavesdropping. It's kind of a skiff. It's specially designed to stop eavesdropping. Reading again, contrary to what one might imagine, the biosafety level is not maximal for this type of research. All right, I know about biosafety levels from the COVID thing. You know, there's BSL 1, 2, 3. BSL 1 is just regular, where you can, diseases that are not particularly dangerous. BSL 2, diseases that could be physically dangerous, although not life-threatening. BSL 3 is diseases that are life-threatening but are not very transmittable. BSL 4, so BSL 3 would include, for example, hepatitis B, HIV. Biosafety level 4 is diseases that are very, very dangerous and could be transmittable, like Ebola, stuff like that. So this biosafety level is not maximal. So he describes it here. Indeed, the lab containing EBO samples or derived cell cultures is BSL 3, while the lab where assays are conducted are only BSL 2. All right, so biosafety level 2 would be something that you don't want to catch because it would be nasty, but it won't kill you. And it's not very transmittable. BSL 3, something you don't want to catch. So the derived cell cultures and EBO samples. Okay, BSL. The BSL 3 area of the facility includes a freezer room where a cell culture lab and is only accessible through an antechamber from the BSL 2 section. Again, that makes sense because you can't actually access this secret area through a place that is less secret. There's no back doors that someone could accidentally slip into and say, oh my God, there's an alien there, that kind of thing. EBO carcasses are preserved in horizontal freezers at a temperature of minus 80 degrees nominal. Right, that's very cold. Minus 80 is well below what you'd get like in a clinical laboratory. I know because I used to deal with them when I was a hospital porter. Clinical laboratories are about the same as a household freezer, minus 10 or so. Minus 80 is far lower. Minus 80 is what temperatures you get in Siberia or Antarctica. To maximize preservation of these carcasses, they are preserved in vacuum bags, and the air in the room is controlled to minimize humidity. Right. So they're obviously intending to hold on to these bodies and tissue samples for a long time. And maybe they have for a long time before then. These could be the bodies from Roswell. So they've literally been there for 80 years, or they've been in one facility or another for 80 years. Maybe they used to be in Right Pat and they moved to Area 51. Maybe they're here. I don't know. Maybe this is Area 51. There are only 4 bodies, and none of them are complete. It's obvious that these creatures have died as a result of a major trauma. I've never witnessed a motorcycle accident fatality, but it probably looks similar to this. Right, that's interesting because that indicates this person is not a medical doctor, but they know enough because they never actually dealt with clinical patients. So they say, well, I don't know what clinical patients do look like when they come in after a bad accident. I do, and I won't describe it to you. So I still have nightmares about it sometimes, but you can tell if a dead body is in pieces, it's dismembered, has bits missing, stuff like that. But they clearly, this indicates that these are creatures that were in a crash retrieval. Reading again. It is acknowledged that there are more EBO carcasses at other locations. There you are, see? The cell culture laboratory, as its name suggests, is where the cell line derived from EBOs are grown and related activities are performed. Yeah. So they've been told that this person knows there are more bodies. There are other biological facilities elsewhere dealing with other aspects of the biological work, and I can well believe it. I mean, I've never believed that it's all Area 51 or it's all Right Pat. These things spread out under numerous contractors among numerous places, including the private sector. And I think this is private sector, and I'll say more about that later. But for more details, listen to my interviews with Dr. Irina Scott, for example. Fascinating lady. I was very privileged to talk to. All right. I'll talk in more detail about these specific cell lines later on. The BSL2 part is mainly used for assays, immunohistochemistry, and genetic engineering, immunocytochemistry, storage, etc. I don't know what a lot of that means. There's also a cell culture lab, but this is used for more traditional cell lines. Other than the labs, there are all the amenities you could find in an office. Note that the internet access is limited to senior staff and up. There is, however, an intranet for bioinformatics needs. Oh yes, I'd love to hack that. Yes. On the subject of the biology of these beings, I'll start by discussing genetics, then their gross anatomy, and finally their biological systems. For the sake of clarity, the information I provide here is an aggregation of what I've observed and what I have read. I will make many comparisons with human anatomy because it's the most logical reference. Genetics. First, I'd like to discuss their genetics. All right, so he starts. Start, you mean to go on, mate? Yeah, so I'm just checking this. Yeah, it's okay. Their genetics are like ours, based on DNA. This fact was very puzzling for me when I first learned about it. We imagined that beings from an alternative biosphere would have genetics based on a completely foreign biochemical system, and surprisingly, this is not the case. Several conclusions can be drawn from this surprising revelation. The one that immediately comes to mind is that our biosphere and theirs share a common ancestry. Yeah, Ben talking again. Yeah, I've heard it. This could be why aliens look like us. In other words, this is kind of a panspermia situation where the Earth's biosphere is actually just part of a larger biosphere that covers the entire universe, or maybe part of the galaxy, certainly the solar system. And they are literally related to us, and DNA, therefore, is literally something you'll find in many parts of this galaxy and maybe beyond. There are other possibilities, which is that they are artificial and that whoever, or rather whatever, has created them has actually drawn on the DNA resources of our planet. That's another possibility. Another possibility is some people claim that they are created in, maybe some of them are created in man-made laboratories, like the PGLFs. I don't believe humans created these, again, because of their antiquity and for other reasons as well, which I'll go into. They are eukaryotes, which means their cells have nuclei containing genetic material. Eukaryotes are basically all animals, plants, and fungi in this world, which suggests that their biosphere would have been separated from ours sometimes after the appearance of this type of organism. The term exobiospheric organism is actually a misnomer, but it's a historical term. It is still used. Their genetics are not only based on the same genetic system, but they're also even compatible with our own cellular machinery. This means that you can take a human gene and insert it into an EBO cell, and that gene will be translated into protein. This, of course, works in reverse with a human gene inserted into an EBO cell. There are important differences in post-translational modifications that will make the final protein non-functional, but I'll discuss these later. Their genome consists of 16 circular chromosomes, right? Chromosomes. You heard about hybrids. I mean, human-alien hybrids. I don't know. It could be that some people are literally related to them. I've met people who claim to be this, and it could be this is a part of that. Reading again. You're probably familiar with the concept, pardon me, of intergenic region or junk DNA. These are basically DNA sequences that don't code for proteins. These are evolutionary residues, transposons, inactivated genes, and so on. Don't know what half that means, but there you go. To give you an idea, in humans, intergenic regions represent approximately 99% of our genome. I'm aware that these sequences aren't completely useless. They can be used as histone anchors and as buffers to protect coding DNA from radiation, or even as alternative open reading frames, but that's rather peripheral. What's particularly striking about the EBO genome is the uniformity of these intergenic regions. We see the same sequences repeated everywhere, and the distance in BP between the genes is virtually the same throughout their genome. The result is a minimalist, highly condensed genome. In fact, it's much smaller than ours. Moreover, the quantity of protein coding genes is even significantly lower than ours, probably due to genetic refinement, but also to biological processes that are absent in EBO. The uniformity of these sequences is a major indication of the artificiality of these beings. There is no complex organism on Earth that has such elegance in its sequences. There is no evolutionary pressure that can lead to this kind of characteristic other than genetic engineering. Right. That's interesting because this is a reason this person believes these creatures are artificial. They have been created probably. I doubt if they've been created by humans, because otherwise the humans wouldn't be studying them in the secret government laboratories. They're created by other aliens. As is, again, there's so much circumstantial evidence that backs this up. Reading again. Speaking of genetic engineering, following sequences of their genomes, we noticed a troubling and universal characteristic in the fifth of the regulatory sequences of each gene, which we called a tripalindromic region. The TPR are the 1, 3, 4 base pair sequences containing, as its name suggests, 3 palindromes. In genetics, a palindrome is a DNA sequence that, when read in the same direction, gives the same sequence on both DNA strands. Right. I didn't understand all of that, but I know that a palindrome in linguistics is a sentence that, when written down in script form, is exactly the same when you reverse it. Such as Abel was I ere I saw Abel, that kind of thing. They serve both as a flag and as a binding site for proteins. The 3 palindromes in the TPR are distinct from one another and have been poetically named 5P TPR, MTPR, and 3TPR. The TPR is composed in 5-3 order of 5P TPR, 12BP spacer, chromosomal address, 12BP spacer, MTPR, 12BP spacer, gene address, 12BP spacer, and 3TPR. I've got no idea what any of that means. The chromosomal address is composed of 4 base pairs and is identical in each TPR of the same chromosome, but distinct between each of the 16 chromosomes of the genome. The gene address is a 64 BP sequence that is unique for each gene in the whole genome. It is therefore understandable that the TPR serves as a unique address not only for numerically identifying a gene, but also for identifying its chromosomal location. For those with only basic knowledge of genetics, like me, this is completely unheard of. No living thing in our biosphere has this kind of precise address in its genome. Once again, the presence of TPR cannot be explained by evolutionary pressure, but only by genetic engineering on a genomic scale. Wow. TPR opens the door to several possibilities. One of them suggests that EBO geneticists can insert or remove a gene from a cell in a way that is far more targeted and efficient than our technology allows. Right. What he's saying here is that this kind of genetic engineering is only possible with a higher level of technology than what we have. We have the technology to analyze this and work it out, but we couldn't create this ourselves, at least not in the publicly available technology. Reading again. No proteins have been identified in the EBO genome that interacts with TPR. Rather, we believe that these proteins are exclusively targeted by external genetic engineering tools, probably used at the zygotic stage of embryonic development. So in other words, when the embryo is a single cell. I get that bit, yeah. The nature of these tools is unclear, but we definitely don't have anything like them. The probable absence of these proteins from the genome is a further indication of their artificiality. Given the high probability of artificiality of their genome and the apparent ease of modifying it with biomolecular tools, it's not out of the question that there could be polymorphism between individuals depending on their role and function. In other words, an individual could be genetically designed to have characteristics that give it an advantage to performing a given task, like soldier ants and worker ants in an anthill, right? Or like the alphas and the betas and the gammas and the deltas and the epsilons in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Reading again. Note that these previous statements are speculation. To my knowledge, only one individual genome has ever been sequenced. I can't make a definitive statement on genetic variations between individuals. I've talked a lot about intergenic regions. Now I'll briefly discuss intragenic sequences, as opposed to intra. Briefly, there's not a lot less to say, despite its obvious importance. Much like ours, their genes have silencers, enhancers, promoters, 5 UTRs, exons, introns, 3 UTRs, etc. There are many genes analogous to ours, which is not surprising given the compatibility of our cellular machinery. What's disturbing is that some genes correspond directly, nucleotide by nucleotide, with known human genes, or even some animal genes. For these genes, there doesn't seem to be any artificial refinement, but rather a crude copying and pasting. Why they do it is nebulous and still subject to conjecture. There are also many genes which are not found in our biosphere whose role has not been identified. Finding the purpose for these novel genes is one of the aims of the program. I'd like to note before going any further that this heterogeneity of genes was of known and unknown origin is an undeniable proof of the artificiality of the EBOs. Yeah. I think I'm beginning to understand why they don't have internet in his laboratory. There's an intranet, but only the senior people are allowed to use the internet. Yeah. All right. To conclude with genetics, the mitochondrial genome at the time I was working there had not yet been sequenced. It's safe to assume that this genome would also be streamlined and possibly have some version of TPR. Blimey. I mean, there is another possibility, which is the reason why their genes are similar to ours, is parallel evolution. Now, this is very unlikely, I think. It's a bit of a long shot, but it could be that the way the universe works in terms of biophysics is that the same DNA kind of DNA chemistry, the same biochemistry, will emerge in a world with a similar environment. So if they live in a similar habitat, they'll develop DNA like we do. I mean, that's a little bit unlikely, but it is a possibility. I think it's one of the least likely possibilities. I think a shared heritage is more likely. Right, transcription and translation and protein expression. I'm reading again. I briefly introduced the differences in post-translational modifications between human and EBO. This is hardly a surprise, as we often see the same thing between different terrestrial species. Obtaining a viable protein from a DNA sequence is a complex process involving hundreds of protein intermediates, each with a precise and essential role. A minor variation in this assembly line can lead to functional irregularities in the final product. So it's no surprise that there are setbacks along the way when the first EBO gene transfection attempts fail to produce the desired functional protein in human cell lines. Right. I should say this sounds, I don't understand every word here, but it sounds similar to the problems we have with cloning, like Dolly the sheep died quite young and was very sick throughout her whole life. She had all kinds of medical problems as a result of being a clone. Reading again. Fortunately for us, the work of what I imagine to be another team at another site has led to the development of an EBO cell line named EPIG11, derived from epithelial tissues. Right. I wonder who they were. I wonder who the people who it was another laboratory somewhere else. EP1IG11. Right. They may know that if they're reading. With this tool in our hands, we were able to transfect and overexpress proteins of interest in order to eventually purify and study them. For your information, we use a biological ballistics delivery system, aka a gene gun, for our transfection needs because other methods are not very effective with cells of this line. For example, the viral vectors tested cannot be internalized by EPIG11, and lipofection is too lethal. EPIG11, like most eukaryotic cell lines, enters a phase of exponential growth when exposed to fetal bovine serum. Right, that's something to do with calves. They use something from a baby cow. Reading again. It's only half surprising that a cell line from such an exotic source should be sensitive to growth factors present in FBS. In my opinion, this can be explained by the addition of animal genes to a genome, such as growth receptors. Now, another possibility which I don't really believe in, and another possibility to explain these creatures, is that, well, the reason they're so like us in terms of their genetics is they're future humans sent backwards in time. Now, I don't believe that. I've never believed that, because traveling backwards in time, it appears, is fundamentally against the laws of physics and would create causality paradoxes and things like that. I've spoken about this before. They possibly come from the distant past, in which case they would have to be a past civilization, because it is possible to travel into the future using Einstein's special relativity. However, there is a possibility which involves the many worlds hypothesis. Was it the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics involving Everett's? Was it Hugh Everett, the guy who invented the idea of different universes continuously splitting off from each other? They can't be They can't be future humans, but they could be humans from a parallel universe that is identical to, or even closely resembles, the possible future of the Earth. Because there's no such thing as a future. There's only possibilities, and this could be one of them in a parallel universe. It's not the future. It's just a parallel reality. But yeah, I think that's a possible. They are interdimensional. This possibility, yeah. But I think again, it's more likely they are genetically engineered by other ETs. Okay, gross anatomy. Reading again. They are morphologically very similar to the grey aliens that are a part of modern folklore. Right. I kind of worked that out. It's funny he should make that reference, actually. It's interesting that these aliens are actually in modern folklore, because they're everywhere, aren't they? I mean, you find them in clothing designs, in not just the movies, but clothing designs and art and popular culture. There's cuddly toy aliens. Where do they come from? I mean, right. What's his name? Brian Dunning. That I've already covered his idiocy. He said, "Oh, they come from. There was no grey aliens before 1977. You know why? Because that's when Close Encounters of the Third Kind was released, and that's where everyone got the idea from." But Robbie Graham, the late guy who's sadly no longer with us, he phoned up the production designer. And he said, "Where'd you get the idea for those grey aliens in Close Encounters, that Spielberg's movie?" And he said, "Oh, it's very simple. I just got in touch with some people who see them, and I asked them what they look like." So Dunning has completely put the cart before the horse. And indeed, as I've already said, this grey alien has been a part of modern folklore possibly since the late 70s, and maybe not so much before then. But it appears in artwork. I mean, Aleister Crowley drew a picture of one. You find them in ancient art. You find them on cave paintings thousands of years old. So there's no doubt there is a real phenomenon out there, in my view, that has influenced this particular pop cultural phenomenon. Their height is, I'm reading again, their height is about 150 centimeters. Right. So again, they're slightly smaller than, I'm personally, I use feet, I use feet rather than centimeters because I'm a Brexiteer. I'm roughly 100, my height, I'm 6'1" to 6'2", so that's roughly 190 odd centimeters. So they're 150 would be below me. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. Still, there are notable differences. Skin. The grey skin that is often described in folklore is in fact a biosynthetic film, which likely serves to protect the EBO from a hostile environment. It doesn't provide effective protection against temperature changes, but it does offer adequate protection against the passage of liquids. It's possible that this film confers other advantages, but my knowledge on the subject is limited. Under the grey film, the epidermis is rather white and the texture is very regular without any hair. We do not see any defect other than the folds near the joints. It's described as greasy in one report, but that's not something I've observed. The report states that a strong lingering smell of burnt hair and ammonia is present when the film is removed. There are a lot of pores on the skin, crossing from the epidermis to a gland in the hypodermis. These glands and pores are the terminal part of the excretory sudiferous system, which could explain their previously mentioned smell. What he's saying is, in other words, the skin is unusual because it doubles up as their excretory system. They release the equivalent of urine from pores on their skin. This could explain many people who see these things say they smell bad. For example, the Virginia alien. Yeah. The head. The head contains 2 large, oversized eyes, 2 nostrils without protuberance, a narrow mouth without lips, and 2 ear canals without auricles. Again, that fits very much with our popular image of these creatures from other witnesses and things like that. Reading again. There is a mandible, but the musculature is vestigial. The mandible is the jaw. Musculature is vestigial, in other words, very weak. There are no teeth or tongue in the oral cavity. The nasal cavity, where the nostrils meet, is compact and does not rise cranially, but extends axially. There appears to be no equivalent to the olfactory bulb in the nasal cavity. The mouth leads directly to the esophagus and the nasal cavity to the trachea. The trachea and esophagus do not communicate. Right. That means basically you don't have like the situation where basically there's a point in our throat where our gullet and our windpipe meet. This is why sometimes you can inhale if you're eating and talking at the same time. You can accidentally inhale your food, hence the coughing and spluttering and the need for the Heimlich maneuver, things like that. People even died because they accidentally inhale a peanut or something. So that's interesting. So that these aliens have a very different form of head. Eyes. Like the skin, the eyes are covered with a semi-transparent biosynthetic film that offers the same environmental protection while providing protection against certain wavelengths and light intensity. When the film is removed, a more traditional eye is revealed. Oh, that's interesting because that's what you see in the alien autopsy film. So Colin Wolford, you'll be happy about this. And the idea that these creatures actually have like a strange covering over their skin matches some people, witnesses such as Whitley Strieber say this. The grey alien is actually covering for something underneath, and also Credo Mutwa, the South African shaman, when he in his interview with David Icke, he says that as well. The eye is about 3 times larger than a human eye, and there are no eyelids. The size of their eyes suggests they have excellent night vision. It seems paradoxical to cover them with a semi-opaque film. Perhaps they only need to wear it in a bright environment. Their sclera is the same color as their skin. That's the covering of your eye. The iris is pale grey and the pupil is black and oversized. The lens is rounder than a human, and the musculature used to adjust focus is more developed. On the retina, there are at least 6 types of cone cells. The responsiveness of each of these 6 types of cone is specific to a wavelength band with a minimum of overlap between each one. The result is a broader visible spectrum. All right. Ear. As mentioned, the outer ear has no auricle. The auricle is this bit. And the ear canal is unremarkable. The inner ear has all the characteristics of a typical vestibular and cochlear system, although the curvature of the cochlea is more pronounced than a human. This probably results in greater hearing acuity for low frequencies. Brain. The brain is tetraspheric, i.e. composed of 4 major sections. The sections are separated by transverse and longitudinal fissures that are connected to the central lobe, which acts as a brainstem and cerebellum. Right. That's interesting. There's 4 sections because, as you know, the human brain, as you're probably aware, has 2 sections called hemispheres, connected by the corpus callosum, which sometimes it used to be cut in half and people would have like these weird split brain experiences, as you may be aware. There are 4 in the alien's brain. Reading again. The volume of the brain is around 20% superior to that of a man of the same height. It has a much more pronounced level of gyrication than an average human. Don't know what that means. Moreover, the ratio of glial cells to neurons is also slightly higher than in humans. It's important to mention the presence of nodules of the central lobe on the central lobe. Histological analysis of these structures reveals a kind of intricate biological circuitry. It is speculated that these nodules are essential to interact with their technology. Consequently, determining the proteome of these structures is an absolute priority for the program. Determining the proteome. Right, this is interesting. Nodules in the brain, essential to interact with their technology. Meaning that essentially they may be bred to have like implants or some way of, that's what they're kind of saying, I think. Neck. The neck is proportionally longer than that of a human, at the same time relatively thin. I've heard that many times. This could be. I sometimes think these aliens may be from a habitat with a lower gravitational field than the Earth. Hence, they are built more lightly. Reading again. As mentioned, the esophagus and trachea are separate. There are no vocal cords in this region. Right, so they can't speak the way we can. Again, these grey aliens very rarely speak. They see there's no tongue or anything as well, so they don't have verbals. But people often describe them as speaking to them mentally in terms of they hear voices in their head. Thorax. I'm reading again. The musculature of the thorax is underdeveloped. Muscles equivalent to the pectoralis major can be seen. We can also see the trapezius and deltoid muscles. The sternocleidomastoids are well defined. The ribs and sternum are clearly visible. There are no nipples. Right. Again, this could be underdeveloped musculature because they're from a low gravity environment. Abdomen. The abdomen is wider than the thorax and bulges slightly forward. A bit like me. There is no navel. All right, there is no navel indicates they don't. If they have no navel, then they haven't grown the way we grow. So again, if there's no navel, they've never been. They're not mammalian. What's it? They're not mammalian. They don't grow in a. Or was it? Yeah, they're not. Is it mammalian? Yeah, they don't have a. What's it called? Vivigenetics, where they grow inside you. Yeah, mammalian. Then the lack of nipples indicates they're not mammalian, indicating the literal meaning of mammalian. In other words, they produce milk. The females produce milk, which they give to the child. Pelvis. Reading again. The pelvic bones are apparent. There are no genitals or anus. Right, that's interesting because, again, the lack of genitals, again, is a common thing, which would indicate, along with the lack of a navel, that they don't reproduce. Maybe it's certainly in the way that animal life on Earth reproduces. That is using sexual or asexual creation of offspring. Lack of an anus, that's interesting. That's probably to do with their diet, and they come on to them later. Okay, hands and feet. Their hands have 4 digits, including an opposable thumb on the medial side. I don't know what that means, but there's your opposable thumb. They have no nails, and the texture of their fingerprints is composed of concentric circles. Fingers are proportionally longer than in humans. Again, that's me talking now. Again, I've noticed that with other witnesses. Again, 4 digits on their hands. Again, you've seen the aliens with the 4 digits on like the Amash logo and things like that. Unlike humans, finger musculature is entirely intrinsic to the hand. In other words, the muscles used to move the fingers are not in the forearms, but entirely located in the hands. Right. That's interesting because, of course, if I do that, you try it yourself. Put your hand there and do that. I don't know if you can still see me. I better just go back to StreamYard. If you put your hand there, you just try and squeeze. I'll do that. Squeeze your fingers like that and put your hand on your forearm. You can feel the muscles tightening. The muscles in the forearm are used to move your fingers. But they're saying, no, the only muscles that move the fingers are in the hand. This probably means they don't have a stronger grip as we do. They probably have less of a grip, I'd say. That's quite likely that they don't grasp as strong as we do. Okay. At first glance, the feet consist of just 2 digits. I've heard that before. But a necropsy, necropsy, soon determined that each toe is made of 2 fused digits. The medial toe is marginally longer than the distal toe. Their feet are relatively longer and narrower than in a human. Their musculature, however, is vestigial. That kind of reminds me of the footprints left at the Virginia scene. You remember that? Reading again. The EBO's endoskeleton is very similar to ours, at least in terms of composition. There's collagen, hydroxyapatite, but also copper oxide crystals where marrow would normally be found. The role of these crystals has not been established, but is not a crystallopathic condition. The blood cells of the myeloid lineage, or the equivalent for these creatures, therefore mature in a different location than in humans, i.e., in the thymus-like organ. A transverse section of the bone reveals osteon and osteocytes. There appear to be few osteoblasts and no osteoclasts. This indicates that the bones are no longer growing and cannot absorb minerals present or adapt mechanically to changes in posture. Right. I don't know what all that means, but it reminds me of as you know from the Star Child skull, that but what you think of as bone which the skull is made of, is actually not the same as normal bone. Right. Biological system, respiratory system. Their cellular respiration is the equivalent to ours. They need to oxidize organic components to produce energy. Their lungs have no reciprocating action, but rather have a unidirectional flow of air, similar to those seen in birds, which is more efficient than ours. It is speculated that this is in response to the brain's elevated metabolic needs. Vocalization is produced by vibration of the wall membrane at the junction between the 2 air sacs. Right. So it can actually speak. This is interesting because vocalizations mean it has like a way of producing sound, the vibration of the membrane in the lungs rather than with a larynx. It doesn't have a larynx like we do. So it probably sounds very different to what we do. Reading again. The circulatory system of the EBO is rather analogous to ours. The heart is located in the media sternum, but in a more medial position beneath the sternum. The heart has 2 ventricles and 2 atria. There is an aorta, a pulmonary vein, a pulmonary artery, and a vena cava. Blood flowing to the pulmonary capillaries via the pulmonary artery is pumped against the flow of air, maximizing gas exchange efficiency. The blood-gas barrier is relatively narrow in these capillaries, at least compared to a human. Then oxygen-rich blood is returned to the heart and then expelled into the aorta and the rest of the body before returning to the heart. The blood will pass through the hepatorenal organ, which, among other things, filters and controls osmotic pressure of the blood. Right. I'll come on to the hepatorenal organ in a minute. It's interesting that. Reading again, the blood itself is also analogous to that of a human. However, the proportion of plasma is much higher. Albumin is in similar proportions. Hormone levels are much lower. Metal ion levels are much higher, particularly copper, and glucose levels are significantly higher. The color of the blood is brownish, given the higher proportion of plasma and concentration of metal ions. Right. Interesting. Timothy Good interviewed a doctor who supposedly operated on the Virginia aliens and said that they have brown blood. Reading again. On the cellular side, there are erythrocytes, which, in addition to hemoglobin for binding oxygen, display several complexes capable of binding copper ions. It's not clear what role these copper ions play, but we believe it neutralizes blood ammonia, among other things. Several cell types with leukocyte characteristics have been observed. All right. It's Ben speaking again. I believe that means like white blood cells that produce antibodies. I think that's what leukocytes are. Reading again, but no comprehensive knowledge of them exists. Platelets are present, but in smaller proportions than in humans. Right. Here we go. This is where there's a tie-in with Virginia and other aliens. Excreto-sudiferous system. This system is completely different from what I've seen. As mentioned earlier, there is no large orifice like an anus or urethra to get rid of biological waste. Instead, there are countless small pores on the surface of the skin. There is a large medial organ called a hepatorenal organ, which acts as both kidney and liver and is central to maintaining homeostasis. This organ is highly vascularized and the blood must pass through it before returning to the heart. Its role is, among other things, to purify the blood of metabolic waste. Waste is excreted into the equivalent of a ureter, which branches out into four. Each branch flows towards one of the four limbs, and in turn these branches divide until they end up as thousands of excretory pores. The motility of this excretory system is mediated by a weak peristalsis at the proximal level and on the four main branches. Peristalsis ceases around the first distal junction. As there is no urea cycle, the ammonia concentration at the exit of the hepatorenal organ is very high. This ammonia is carried to the pores and gives the distinct odor I mentioned earlier. The rationale behind this unusual excretory system is directly related to this excreted ammonia, which enables thermoregulation by evaporating from the skin's surface. The greater the physical effort, the greater the metabolism. This in turn leads to a rise in temperature and corresponding increase in metabolic waste via amino acid catabolism. This leads to an increase in filtration and ammonia excretion, which ultimately lowers body temperature. Right. That's interesting. So what he's basically saying is that they pee through their skin. Their urine goes to the skin and comes out through their skin pores. And not only that, but that urine also doubles up as sweat. It has the same function as sweat. Now, in other words, it's used to regulate body temperature, to cool the body when there's a lot of heat around. Now, when I was a kid, right, I had a really idiot teacher at school who used to take me for, well, he was like, he used to, I can't remember what subject he was taught, but he sometimes stepped in to help with the PE lessons, right? I'll never forget him because he shocked me to death. He almost shocked me to death once because he said, you know, you have to have your shower after you've had your games, because I hated going in the shower because you've got to strip off in front of the other kids and everyone's comparing how much hair you've got on your bollocks and things like that. You know what kids are like. And he said, you must have a shower afterwards, because you know the stuff that comes off your body when you sweat, he said, it's the same as what comes out when you wee. So he's saying that basically sweat and urine are the same thing. Now, that's complete bollocks. And I can't remember what subject he taught when he wasn't stepping in for the games teacher, but I do hope it wasn't biology, because that's bollocks. Sweat and urine are two different things in humans and many other animals. But in the case of these beings, it is the same thing. So if this teacher was watching, did you work on one of these projects and it gave you the idea of lying to us when you were a teacher? If you're a teacher at Headington Middle School in the late 80s, I'm looking at you. Who are you? I can't even remember. Mr. Somebody. I can't remember who it was. All right. Carrying on. Digestive system. The digestive system is extremely underdeveloped. There's no stomach in the familiar sense. However, there is a pseudostomach located at the transition between the thoracic and abdominal cavities. This organ is not involved in digestion, but only serves as a reservoir. A sphincter controls the flow of blood into the intestine. Sorry, the flow of food into the intestine. The intestine is limited to the equivalent of our small intestine, i.e. it only serves to absorb liquids and nutrients and acts as the main digestion site. It has villi and microvilli like ours. The intestine ends in the hepatorenal organ, where non-digested matter is transported to the ureter and excretory system. Residues are dissolved in the ammonia of metabolic waste for excretion. There's an organ near the pseudostomachal sphincter that excretes digestive enzymes directly into the intestine. This organ is inspirationally called the digestive organ. It secretes mainly proteolytic enzymes and glycoside hydrolases. Right. That's interesting. So he says here, given the absence of teeth, the narrowness and rigidity of the esophagus, the absence of a true stomach, and the absence of defecation, it is strongly believed that EBOs can only consume food in liquid form. It is assumed that given the high metabolic needs of their brains, this food would have would have a high carbohydrate concentration. In order to meet other metabolic needs, there must also be a high protein content in the food consumed. These two statements are supported by the type of enzyme secreted by the digestive organ. It is therefore speculated that food is consumed in a sort of broth rich in sugar and protein, which probably also has a high copper content. Given the strict limitations of the type of food they can consume, it's unlikely this type of creature could survive in our biosphere without technological support. Right. That's interesting, because what he's saying here is this creature is essentially eats artificial food, because it reminds me of RoboCop. Do you remember in the film RoboCop, the robot, that cyborg has to consume this thing that someone describes as like baby food? One of the other characters says this. So these creatures have a very, very limited diet. Now, a lot of animals do. I mean, it's a sad fact, but a lot of humans, who own pets, especially horses, will often kill these pets by feeding them the wrong diet. You can easily kill an animal by just giving it the wrong food, and we don't appreciate that because we humans are omnivores. We can eat almost anything: plant, vegetable, animal, protein, anything. This is one of the reasons we're so successful, along with rats. We can consume almost anything. So we don't actually appreciate that many other animals cannot actually eat anything other than very more restricted. Anything other than certain foods is total poison to them. This is why you shouldn't give horses too many apples, because if you feed horses on too many apples, they gain weight and they gain all kinds of health problems, because they don't normally eat apples. They normally just eat grass. They have teeth problems because they can't handle the sugar in an apple, stuff like that. And these creatures seem to be the same. They can literally, because they seem to be evolved only to eating a very, 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 very restricted liquid diet, which may well be some kind of artificial substance which is fed to them as a nutrient. Yeah. Don't invite these guys around for dinner, guys, because you could kill them. You could literally kill them. Another slice of Viennetta, Mr. Alien. It's like that's the most interesting part. That's probably the most interesting part of this treatise, actually. So they couldn't survive in our biosphere without technological support. So there's another reason they didn't evolve here. Okay. Endocrine system. Knowledge of the endocrine system is minimal. We know that cells are receptive to bovine growth hormones, so it's assumed that certain functions are regulated by such a system. Endocrine mechanisms are very complex, and it goes without saying that they are best studied on living subjects. Right. Right. So I wonder if endocrines means the hormones. I wonder if they do have any living ones somewhere. Well, the Alien interview, my interview with Jon Stewart, maybe they do. Immune system. The immune system is another unknown. There seems to be an innate immune system, but there doesn't seem to be any adaptive immunity, at least not similar to what is known. There's a thymus-like organ near the heart that's proportionally larger than in humans. This organ seems to be where all the blood cells mature. Some cells have leukocyte characteristics, such as granularity. The immune cells that germinate here have a high copper concentration. The surface receptors of innate immune cells have not yet been characterized. So we might as well say that all the work remains to be done. All right. Again, if they are from our world, they would have a recognizable immune system with antibodies that would react against pathogens that we have to deal with as humans. It's very famously, it's not just humans, but even among different humans, we have different pathogen reactions. Very famously, when European settlers reached the North American continent, they interacted with the Amerindians. These people suddenly started dying of colds and flu because they had no immunity to those diseases that we Europeans are perfectly can deal with perfectly easily because we've evolved with them. Nervous system. The nervous system is also relatively similar. The spinal cord begins at the base of the central lobe of the brain and propagates down the vertebral column. In the vertebrae, there are ganglia of afferent and efferent neurons. In short, other than the CNS, there is nothing out of the ordinary. Musculoskeletal system. The musculoskeletal system is very ordinary, albeit underdeveloped. Most of the human skeletal muscles have an equivalent. Only the hands, feet, and forearms are different. It should be noted that the proportion of type 1 and type 2 muscle fibers is different than that in humans. Indeed, type 1 outnumbers type 2 by a factor of 10. And then it says artificial system. We speculate that artificial molecular machines may be present in the body, and that copper, if present, would be essential to their function or assembly. Importantly, no AMMs have been observed. Now, that's very interesting. what makes that interesting is they're essentially saying that this creature was genetically engineered to work in conjunction with nanotechnology. In other words, it's a cyborg with nanotechnology as its part of its biology. Now, that would be incredible if that were true. But as they say, none have been observed in the body. It could be that this nanotechnology left the body when it died, or it could be it destroyed itself. We don't know. But as he said, that work maybe has to be done. Fascinating stuff. But that's not the end. There's a Q&A. Okay, yeah. Now, what happened was this. Obviously, this. I'll tell you a little bit more about what happened to this particular post in a minute. But there was this post was originally posted on Our Aliens, and it was flipped over to, it was actually copied onto Our Biology, and a number of Redditors started asking questions. And so what happened was, the first question that was asked was a very obvious one. Amazing story. Have you shared this with the Senate Select Commission on Intelligence or with Arrow? And do you have any evidence to back this up? Right, that's an interesting question, because this was about the time when all these hearings that was just started out about a year ago, is when there's lots of hearings that are taking place and stuff like that. And this person replied, "Thank you. No, I haven't, and no, I won't. It sounds like a honey trap to me. I will not place my life in the hands of politicians. I have no proof other than this message. I know it's not much, but it's what I'm prepared to offer." Yeah, I don't know if it's, this person, I don't know if the whole Arrow hearings and the various things are honey traps. I know a lot of the backslappers will say, yeah, Elizondo's a shill and Dave Gross is a shill and everyone's a shill, shill and stuff like that. But I'm not so sure about that. But anyway, I'm not the one taking the risk. It's this guy or gal who's taking the risk. So yeah. Question 2. Well, that was a read. So they are bioengineered worker bees. Any elemental components that are attributable to our biome? Answer: yes, knowing that they're disposable, unable to live independently without technological support, and that they are ephemeral. The only suitable hypothesis is that they are alive only to accomplish their task. Can you clarify your question about elemental components? Question 3. I haven't read everything in detail, but can you expand on the document on their religion? Answer: now, this is very interesting, because this ties in with what Jon Stewart has said about the alien interview. All right. EBOs believe that the soul is not an extension of the individual, but rather a fundamental characteristic of the nature that expresses itself as a field, not unlike gravity. In the presence of life, this field acquires complexity, resulting in negative entropy, if that makes sense. This gain in complexity is directly correlated with the concentration of living organisms in a given location. With time and with the right conditions, life in turn becomes more complex until the appearance of sentient life. After reaching this threshold, the field begins to express itself through these sentient beings forming what we call the soul. Through their life experiences, sentient beings will in turn influence the field in a sort of positive feedback loop. This in turn further escalates the complexity of the field. Eventually, when the field reaches a critical mass, there will be a sort of apotheosis. It's not clear what this means in practical terms, but this quest for apotheosis seems to be the EBO's main motivation. How interesting is that? Do you remember the being in the alien interview talks about the vessel of consciousness, the belief that in reincarnation, how you move from vessel to vessel, things like that. And of course, what we just read here is, in scientific terminology, is very similar to what is believed by many ancient Oriental mystics, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc. It's very much along those lines. That, I think, is very, very interesting indeed. Now, I'll just go through. I made some notes here. It's like the hive consciousness, like you get the Borg, and again, this resembles the spiritual traditions of Earth. Now, this is. I'll carry on here. Right. Okay. And then the witness continues. The author of now he's referring to whoever wrote the documents on their religion. The author of the document added his reflections and interpretations as an appendix. He specified that for them, the soul field is not a belief but an obvious truth. He also argues that the soul loses its individuality after death, but that memory and experience persist as part of the field. This fact would influence the philosophy and culture of EPOs, resulting in a society that doesn't fear death, but which places no importance or reverence on the individuality. What I've just read here is essentially, well, firstly, that again fits in with lots of Oriental mysticism. The idea that we're all one at a higher level, the daemon, as Anthony Peake calls it, etc., or the uber daemon. But also, isn't this the world described with enormous amount of fear in the film The Discovery? Now, I'm not going to put a link in the description box, but you can find the not watch party, but it was a review I did of the film The Discovery. If you've not seen The Discovery, do watch it. It is on Netflix, and, well, it's in a few other places as well. But do watch The Discovery, because this is a film, and again, it addresses something I've discussed many times. What would happen if the afterlife was actually proved to be real? And I think what you're looking at with The Discovery is essentially the dark fantasy of a skeptic. I expect there are some skeptics who know there's an afterlife, but they keep it quiet because they're terrified of this particular outcome. What happens is there's this mad scientist called Thomas Harbour, and he lives in this laboratory on a remote island. He's played by Robert Redford, and he has family that he interacts with, but he discovers the proof that there's an afterlife, and as a result, the suicide rate starts skyrocketing. Now, I personally don't believe that would happen. Unlike Richard Dawkins and other people, Richard Dawkins has said, there's a nobility in knowing there's no afterlife. It makes our own life more precious. I don't really see how that follows. I don't really understand why that should be the case. But that's what he believes, and that's what a lot of other people believe, which is why they fear this very scenario. And this is a scenario that seems to exist in the culture of these creatures. Maybe on the creatures that created them as well, if they are artificial. Interesting stuff. Reading again. This belief compels them to seed life, shape it, nurture it, and monitor it, and influence it for the ultimate purpose of creating this apotheosis. Paradoxically, they have little or no respect for an individual's well-being. Now, they wouldn't. Maybe if they're really hooked into the hive mind, they may actually not see individual people as important. That's a scary idea. But again, this goes along with the idea of them seeding life. The ancient aliens, they talk about this, about they come down here and they create or they breed intelligent life, or it's punctuated evolution. That fits in with ancient aliens, Eric von Daniken, etc. And the person continues. Please be advised that I'm speaking from memory of something I read more than 10 years ago, so take the following with a grain of salt. Also, I'm not a philosopher or an artist, so please excuse my struggle to properly formulate the concepts and my dry terminology. Finally, note that this information comes from a document whose author was directly interacting with an EBO. It's not specified whether it was an ambassador, a crash survivor, a prisoner. The means of communication were not specified either. Maybe it was Victor. Was it Victor, who I don't think is Stan Deo, but there you go. Now, there's something else happened. Something weird happened then, because there's like a gap in the text. I'll show it to you actually. There's a gap in the text. Here we go, at the very end. And he says, see, this is the last bit I just read about that. And then suddenly there's a gap, because then the question 4 is, WTF, he just dropped the location of the lab. Battelle National Biodefense Institute. It's on Google Maps. So probably the person said something there which they themselves, the user, then deleted, which is possibly what happened next. Yeah, this is where it gets a bit worrying. And it's, you see, many I do wonder for a while whether this person actually was Gary Nolan. I did. But this is where this could explain why the post was deleted and the author, disappeared. Because at some point they must have revealed the connection between themselves and the Battelle Memorial Institute, which fits in with what I've said before. Indeed, even alien scientists said that the Battelle Memorial Institute owns and runs all the scientific institutions in the USA. And Dr. Irena Scott worked there. If you've ever read her book, Sacred Corridors, or listen to the interviews I did with her, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now, I don't know if this revelation was deliberate or accidental, but it was very quickly deleted, probably by the user themselves, but too many people saw it. And as I said, the Fort Detrick thing was a red herring. They just put that in there because that's not where they really are. But it may have led to what happened next. Now, as I said earlier, UFO whistleblowers, they're two a penny these days. They vary in, I think, credibility. Many people say none of them are credible. I wouldn't say that, but I do think this Reddit post stands out from the junk pile, and that's because the technical level of its language. The person behind it, I believe, is scientifically educated. They're not just waffling and I don't understand it, but there are commentators who feel there is a subtext of validity from it, and that the fact they use the right terminology. I'm not saying seriously I think it was Gary Nolan. I'm not saying it's anyone who's active in the UFO community, not least because the post was removed within days and the author's account was deleted. Now, I don't know if the author did that themselves, or maybe because they were scared, or maybe they were silenced by someone outside, or maybe Reddit admin did it. But it's because it's possibly because it may be because they mentioned Battelle. It may be because they mentioned Battelle and they suddenly realized, oh my God, I shouldn't have said that. And either they then decided to go quiet because of it, or someone outside identified them and they have been nobbled. They've been silenced, either physically or maybe they've just been threatened and said, don't you ever do that again, like Dennis Mariani did with Bob Lazar. I don't know, maybe they just did that. Maybe they were just threatened into silence, or maybe they were literally disposed of, or maybe they're in prison somewhere. I don't know. Wherever they are, I hope they're safe. This person, he, she, or they, I hope they are safe. And you may say, well, if it was deleted, how come you can read it? Well, luckily, you can never completely delete things on the internet, and it was archived, it was downloaded, it has proliferated to the point where it can't really be deleted. So millions of people now have copies of it. So there's even several versions on YouTube, illustrated audio versions of this. So what's so interesting about this, Ben? I hear you ask. Well, I'm convinced that programs studying alien life exist, probably in major military, defense, industrial, academic institutions, maybe just a short distance from where I am sitting here in Oxford. And the authentic sounding nature of this particular case, mixed in with the circumstantial evidence and other witness testimony, I think makes this very significant. Yes, there's no proof. I know there's no proof. Obviously, there's no proof, but still. I think this is. Let me just double check. I've got everything in my notes, but yeah, I think this issue is worth talking about, and I hope we get some more information about it soon. And like I said, I reiterate, I apologize if I've misgendered this person. I say he. I hope he, she, or whatever they are, it has not been harmed by this very brave decision they made to speak out. And it could be that it could turn out to be the thing, the spark that lights the tinderbox, that lights the powder keg of catastrophic disclosure. And let's face it, if Trump has just released this statement saying drones are just drones, I don't know if I don't know whether this destroys his credibility completely. I would say no at this point. As you know, I'm a Trump enthusiast. But if at the end of the day, if Trump is threatened or cajoled or gagged or pushed into not doing what he wants to do, then catastrophic disclosure is the only way. And the word catastrophic is like, oh, catastrophe, apocalypse, disaster. I mean, it's, catastrophic I don't like that term. Steve Bassett doesn't like it. I don't like that term either, because it implies this is something bad, it's something awful. But no, catastrophic disclosure could be the only way. And yeah, if the government institutions are really silencing, organized disclosure or willing disclosure, then they have only themselves to blame. And yes, there may be upheaval, as the person says, but the longer we wait, as this scientist says, the worse it will be. So as far as catastrophic disclosure goes, I say bring it on. Let's have more of it. You contact me if you like, and if you've got anything you want to say, I will treat it in a professional manner. I won't reveal anything unless you want me to reveal it. But at the same time, I'm not scared to put myself into the position where I could be the person publicizing it. This doesn't mean I'll publish anything you send me, but if it has that air of credibility, that intuitive sense that it makes sense, I'm happy to tell other people. So, well, there'll be more coming soon, hopefully on this subject, but on others as well. I've got to do the Molyneux thing. That's going to be fun. And I've got several other videos planned. But in the meantime, thank you all of you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order.